I'm awosika and I work in business transformation. I think when you're trying to establish the problem and solution to your product, the first thing you need to know is your market. So you need to know who your collaborators are and who your competitors are and what makes you different, what makes you unique. When you understand that, it's then about making sure that you could sort of create that gap and operate in that gap. Because that's essentially where you're going to thrive. That's what's going to make your business different and make your why very clear. So I think similar to before, what you need to do is that you need to make sure that you understand the gap to which your product sits. And the space to do that is really to just draw it out. I'm not sure if you've heard of a social business model canvas, but I would definitely suggest using one. It's the best way to understand the key activities that your product delivers that another business does not. And if it's not different, how is the way you deliver it different? So for example, I work in consulting and everyone consults. Everyone has the ability to say that they're going to deliver on X, Y, Z. But the work and the market that I work in is with public sector organisations who have grown too quickly and don't have the time to fix the problems that have come with exponential growth. And so what makes me different is how I work with the people. I have a background in public sector work. I completely understand the pain points. And so therefore I know how to make sure that I get the best out of the teams that I'm working with. Another thing that I noticed in the gap in the market is that actually a lot of organisations, if they do work in public sector, it's very batch produced. They give them recommendations at the end, but they never really stop to take the time, pull up their sleeves and get involved in the implementation of the project. And I think that's the biggest problem when it comes to the public sector. There isn't time or resource to roll up your sleeves and get the recommendations done. So actually, rather than just working on a specific type of consultancy, we take it the whole way. We take it from audit and assessment of what you need to delivery of what you asked for. So I think when you're working to establish your product, the first thing you need to do is build a network of who you're going to ask. It can be friends, it can be maybe people that you've worked with before, but you need to understand the pain points. You can start with a hypothesis, an assumption. My assumption was that organisations that grow too quickly don't have the resource to ever stop and reconsider whether they did it correctly. And so from there, I asked different organisations. I asked charity organisations, public sector, social enterprises, and I got to the root of what the pain point is. After I got to the root of the pain point, I then started working to figure out how I might solve that. So after I then realised what the pain point was, you then do the work to figure out what the market is currently doing to solve that. And what I noticed, like I said, is that other organisations that work in the space of the public sector often shy away from doing the work to implement the change. They just give you the list of recommendations. The audit and assessment piece of work that is done to make sure they understand what the recommendations could be can often be quite bog standard. They do a survey, they send it out, they come back with recommendations. So what I decided to do differently was actually to sit with people individually and find out exactly what the gap in the market was. The pain point in that was that the work was way too broad and way too general, so I decided to go hone in and be specific. And I think that's really important, and you establishing the difference between what you deliver and what your competitors deliver. Once you do that, I think the next piece, after you understand the differences between that, is how you sell that as well. So you need to be very confident in how you sell the differences between you and anyone else anyone could go to. So like I said, if you do something similar to what another organisation does, it's about making sure you establish how your delivery is different. And one thing that I noticed in my market was that people then often would rely on quite big organisations to come in and do the consultancy because they will have to go to an organisation to fund that. So that means that actually the problem is that there's not a lot of money in this space for some of the organisations that need the most help. And so then it becomes about how can you give an offer that is too good for them to refuse because actually they're not getting that elsewhere. So I think a lot of the work is in your market research. It's really important to make sure that you go to a broad list of clientele when you're trying to identify what your product is. Then when it comes to actually selling your product, a lot of the people would have been within the same pool. So actually can then reach back out to the people that you were once asking questions to define what the pain point was, to say, I've solved it. So actually you become your own seller in that space, because you sat them around the table, whether it was a focus group or an interview, you found out what their pain point was, and you come back to them telling them that you have a viable solution. And I think that's how you start opening up your clientele. Everyone that was willing to give you all of the information before will then be willing to give you a contact, because they understand the pain point and they understand that you are finding a different way to solve it. And then they become your best marketers as well. So if you spend a lot of time doing your market research, you can actually use all of those people to push your product. So I think it very much depends on your product, how you create your indicators and your KPIs. But I think the best thing to do is always just don't shoot too high. I think in our first 2 years, like the numbers do showcase that it's quite difficult to grow a business in the first 2 years. And I think that's also the time period in which most businesses fail. Now, that's not to say that it's you, it's just to say that you need to be very aware of some of the things that you're going to experience and go through. I think then, in terms of setting those indicators, it should be dependent on actually your numbers. How many people do you feel like you can sell to based on the amount of people you spoke to during your market research? And actually, if that isn't the way that you got your clients, of the number of clients that you're going to try and sell to, what is a realistic target of how many people will take up your product? And I think if you start doing that and you create a really simple way of managing that, a RAG tracker potentially, red, amber, green, to showcase what is a potential and what isn't. I think after you gather the data of the people that you've already tried to work with, when you then start cold calling people, it becomes a bit of an indicator as to what it's going to be like when you go out to market further than the people you already speak to. In terms of when is the best time to understand product market fit, I don't think there is a best time. I think it's always, I think you should always just go for it. I think the only thing you need to be mindful with time is when you launch it. And what I mean by that is that you could do all of the market research today rather than 2 years from now when you're a little bit more comfortable with being a founder. You can set the organization up today rather than 2 years from now when you're a little bit more comfortable in being a founder and you've done an accelerator program. You can start and there's absolutely no repercussions to you opening up because you don't have to trade immediately. But there is a lot of benefit to starting now because the things that it pushes you to do are going to be things that you're going to have to do 2 years from now. In terms of when you launch your product, I think that is the piece of work that needs to be completely dependent on your client. It needs to be completely dependent on your trajectory. And you see a lot of organizations now launch with a bang. And I think depending on your product, it's up to you whether that's what you want to do or you want to trickle slowly. But sometimes that can be quite impactful to launch with a bang, and sometimes you can do it and actually the tree fell in the forest and no one heard it. So I think it's quite important to sort of manage your expectations in that as well. And my top tip is that make sure you do the work to understand the gap in the market and how your service and or product delivers on that.